Welcome back to The Late Late Show. My next guest suffered in silence for years, the victim of her stepfather, an Irish rugby international and a politician who, in public, was a hero to many, but whose depravity in private wrought a terrible price. She's here tonight to tell us why she won't be silenced any longer and why sometimes the only thing you should do is speak ill of the dead. Would you please welcome Amanda Brown? Amanda, Davy Tweed is a name that many people know. He played for Ulster, he played for Ireland, he was a DUP councillor. When he died, you decided to waive your anonymity and tell your story. Why was that?
Well, when the news hit about his death, he was being lauded as a sporting hero. And as much as he may have been good at rugby and, you know, he may have been good on the pitch, he was also a paedophile. And I think it was that kind of big sister sort of attitude that I have, that, you know, wanting to protect my younger sisters as well and not wanting them to have to see that the person who abused them and me was being hailed as some kind of hero, or was, you know, there was some kind of like not martyrdom, but you know what I mean. It's just, I didn't want that. I also have family living in Ballymoney as well, they have been shattered by what he has done as well. And with Ballymoney being such a small town, I was just concerned that they might do something like name a roundabout or something after him. And I just didn't think it was appropriate that they would have to live in their hometown and see a memorial of the monster that ruined their lives, ruined our lives.
He was your stepfather.
Yeah.
You lived with him in a house that was dominated by violence and fear. Mm-hmm. Your mother was his first victim.
Yeah. He was very physically abusive towards her, and a lot of that in the early days we wouldn't have seen. We would have heard a lot of it, and we would have seen the bruises, you know, we'd have seen the aftermath, but not so much the abuse in the early stages. It wasn't as, you know, as time went on, he became braver, so to speak, to hit her in front of us. And there was one time he actually threw her into our bedroom and made her, she was sobbing, made her tell us that she deserved the hammering that she'd just got.
One of the things you write about in the book is one of your first fully formed memories of the sexual abuse that Davy Tweed inflicted on you. What age were you then? I was around 7 or 8.
And, you know, I know that a lot of people have this idea, and I don't know whether it comes from the movies or maybe some people are like this, that you have these memories burned into your mind and you don't forget them. But for me, the memories of my abuse it was like if someone had thrown a lot of jigsaws onto the floor and taken away the boxes and you were left to piece together these jigsaws. So it was extremely difficult piecing that together, and I knew it was something that I had to piece together in order to be able to go to the police.
Did you have any understanding of what was going on when you were that young?
No, I had no clue. I knew that it was wrong, it felt wrong, but I didn't know what was happening, I didn't know what it was.
And how long did this go on for?
It went on until I was 15. Whenever I moved into the bedroom that was directly opposite their bedroom, that's when the daily abuse stopped.
You held it in.
Yeah.
Like lots of victims, you didn't tell anybody. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Primarily to protect my family. He had told me that if I spoke out, that he would go to jail. And that if he went to jail, then there would be no money coming into the house, and my mum would be forced to beg on the streets with my younger sister, who was only a baby at the time, and that my brother and I would end up in a home, separate to each other. And you know, it was he instilled that need to protect my family and me from a very young age, and that need to protect them became stronger with the more violent that he became towards my mum.
You came up with an idea during all of this to try to get him to stop. What was that?
I asked him to adopt me because I thought that if he seen me as his own daughter, that he would stop abusing me. I had no idea that he was abusing his own daughters.
He had a public persona.
Yeah.
And what was going on at home was very different. Mm-hmm. It was the same for you, wasn't it? You had to have a public persona as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm sure people who remember me from school might remember me as being quite assertive or ballsy. But added to that, I would have created this image that I was a daddy's girl. And, you know, I did that because I couldn't risk anybody finding out that there was anything going on, you know, that was untoward. I just couldn't risk him thinking that I had told anybody. You know, I just didn't want anybody guessing that there were any issues through fear of what he would do to my mum.
So, 2 more victims end up coming forward. Mm-hmm. When you find this out, this prompts you to tell your family, and then you find out that your sisters were also being abused.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
It was devastating. It was difficult enough to hear about the other 2, but then whenever my sisters came along, one by one, saying me too, it was incredibly difficult. I'd spent my life watching them.
Because they were younger?
Yeah, thinking that I would be able to see if they had been abused in any way. And because I missed that, I carried an incredible amount of guilt for that. Yourself
and your sister went to the police. Mm-hmm. It eventually ended up in court. Mm-hmm. I know that trial was very, very difficult for you.
Yeah, it was. It was very difficult for both of us, and I just don't think that the entire system is set up, you know, from reporting right the way through. I don't think it's set up that it's favourable, or, you know, it just doesn't work for victims. You say in the book that at times in court you felt like you were being treated as a witness rather than a victim. Well, that's exactly how I was. It's not that I was being treated as. I was called as a witness to the Crown. I wasn't a victim in this case at all. I was a witness. And I think even the language around that is quite difficult to, you know, to process whenever you are a victim stepping into this, you know, to somehow minimise your experience by calling you a witness.
So he was convicted, 8 years sentence, 4 suspended. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that didn't feel like justice?
No, it didn't at all. Considering that the abuse happened for me alone over the span of around 8 years, and there was 2 of us there, plus as well as that, like, we live with the impacts of that abuse every day and will do until, you know, probably the day we die, and it impacts every aspect. It has impacted every aspect of my life. So no, it didn't feel like justice at all.
We also have to mention and remember your cousin Gemma tonight.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened to Gemma.
Gemma was also abused by him, and she did go to the police as well around the time that we had spoken to the police. And her jigsaw puzzle just wasn't complete enough. And they had said to her at the time that her evidence wasn't strong enough for it to, you know, to go to court to be able to get a prosecution. So she didn't feel like she was believed. And I just think that if there had been a system in place then for her, that there had been someone who was qualified in a way that could have sat with her and helped her to put her jigsaw together, that things might have been different. But, you know, I can look at all the various ways that she was let down, but ultimately she would still be here if he hadn't abused her, you know.
Because she took her own life?
Yeah, she did. She took her own life because it was just too much for her.
He goes to jail. He's in jail for 4 years. He's just about to get out. And you get the news that the Court of Appeal, there's a legal technicality in the case, which means that his conviction was quashed. Mm-hmm. But what happened by that?
Well, it was as if the it was as if the court case had never happened, but what had happened, or I didn't even realise that he had put in for an appeal. I knew nothing about it until he had got out and it was on the news and someone rang me to tell me about it. But the technicality he got out on was in how the judge addressed the jury in terms of the bad character clause. And the bad character clause was something that his legal team had brought into our court case in relation to the abuse of my mum. And
so this was completely secondary to the sexual abuse that was going on?
Yeah. So his legal team brought this bad character clause in and they wanted to use it to try and say that that's the reason why we were making false allegations against him. And the judge, whenever he was addressing the jury, addressed the jury on what they could use the clause for, but didn't tell them what they couldn't use it for. And that's the technicality that he got off on.
So it really was a technicality.
Yep.
After him abusing you and your sisters and your cousin Gemma, and Gemma committing suicide.
Yep.
He is now back out after 4 years, and not only back out, but back out with a clean record.
Yeah, yeah. It was...
How did that feel?
There was complete disbelief to start off with, you know, that this could even have happened. I was I don't know how it managed to happen 4 years later. I think it was a very clever trick by his, you know, legal team at that time. They knew what they were doing. They had a job to do, that's fine. But it meant that, you know, everything that we had done, you know, in terms of the court case was, you know, it was for nothing. And there he was walking around.
And he ended up living very close to your mother again.
Yeah. It was actually because after he had got out, he's still living in that town where my mum and the rest of my family lived. So I had spent a lot of time trying to convince them to move to Belfast where I was. And it wasn't until shortly after my mum had actually given and agreed to move that he then moved into a house at the end of the avenue of where my mum lived.
5 years later, he's killed in a motorbike accident.
Yeah.
When you got that news, what was going through your mind?
When I very first heard it, I didn't want to believe it, but from a point of view of not wanting to let my guard down, and I waited until I had seen it, and it was in the newspaper, it was broken on social media, on the news, and I then shared that because he was again being hailed a hero, you know.
There were lots of people who knew him and various politicians that were saying what a great person he was.
Yeah, yeah. And do you know what? As a victim of his, and again, with my younger sisters and that need to protect them and wanting to protect them from that, it was like he was a paedophile. He needs to be remembered for that as well. You can't just pretend that this didn't happen to suit, you know, the fact that we don't speak ill of the dead here. You know, that's not how this should work. That you need to remember the victims and respect the victims for what they have experienced as well.
One of the other things you write in the book is that some people wanted you to forgive Davy Tweed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, was that something you could ever dream of?
No. Well, I tried. I spent 2 years trying. I went on various courses and followed different people, different forms of forgiveness prayers and whatever that I could find to try and forgive him. I really dug deep. And in the end, I couldn't. But during that period of time where I was trying to forgive him, I got to a place of feeling really bad about myself. It really knocked my mental health because I felt that I was as bad as him because I couldn't forgive him. And that's because of, you know, in terms of spirituality and things like that people are putting this idea that you have to forgive. But I just couldn't.
Is there anybody else in this story that you were able to forgive?
Yes, the little girl that's on the front of that book. And I was able to forgive her for not speaking up back then. I was able to forgive her for not running and telling her mummy like she wanted to. And I'm still working on a lot of forgiveness for myself, but she primarily is the first person that I've wanted to try and forgive.
If there are other victims tonight watching in similar circumstances, do you have a message for them, Amanda?
Yeah, it's do what you need to do to heal. And I know that I have gained a lot of healing from telling my story, and I know that other people have got some healing from me telling this story as well. And if you can't tell your own story, tell mine. Because I think it's important that we have these conversations around dinner tables. I think it's important that we share stories like these, because the more we share stories like these, the fewer places that abusers have to hide in.
Amanda, thank you so much for coming to share your story tonight. Amanda's book, No Peace Until He's Dead, is available in bookshops now. Would you please thank Amanda Brown? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.